What a great day 3 we've got going. We've got a great honor and a privilege to start off with an incredible plenary, which is the COVID-19 vaccine as a global common good. I will, of course, allow my co-MC Shihab Kader to reflect on it further. However, it will be incomplete without quickly recapping what we've done on day 2. Social business updates across the world, and in a great keynote presentation from Peter Holbrook, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Social Enterprise UK. We had another very passionate and a very inspiring keynote from Mr. Narayan Murthy, who's the founder of Infosys. We got to hear and actually see a lot of Novin or new entrepreneur businesses in Bangladesh, in Kosovo, in Yemen. And of course, we ended off with the updates from Grameen America and their Black Women Entrepreneurship Program. And of course, that ended off with the commencement of country forums, which we are glad to report that it's been held across, 4 continents, more than 15 countries. And it only shows the commitment that people across the world have towards the movement. I'm also very glad to report that we've had more than 1,000 participants from all different platforms, the technology platforms, the social media outlets, and we deeply thank you for continuing to be with us. And I will not take up more time because we've got a great lineup of inspiring speakers, and I'll hand it over to my colleague Shihab Kader to introduce the panel and of course the moderators and everyone else. Over to you, Shihab. Thank you.
Thanks, Promi. Hopefully everyone listening to me loud and clear. First of all, a big shout out to our partners on the ground, Kampala International University in Kampala, Uganda. Hi guys, hi to Professor DG, the co-VC over there. And also in Harare, Zimbabwe, the Catholic University of Zimbabwe. Mr. Douglas, Professor Douglas, if you can reach, say hi to us, it would be great sometime after the event. All right, good wishes to all of you in East Africa and Southern Africa. So ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin our next session and the most anticipated session of today, the plenary session on the COVID-19 vaccine as a global common good. Now, our moderator today has earned a special reputation for his interviews with leaders in politics, science, health, including Nobel Peace Prize laureates such as Kofi Annan, Muhammad Yunus, and Jimmy Carter. He is adding also another additional one in this to his tally today. I'm sure you will know later. And then there was interviews with Winnie Mandela, Christine Lagarde, Jane Goodall, Paul Kagame, Elton John, Bill Gates, Angela Merkel, Jack Ma, and the Canadian Prime Minister who knows how to do yoga. So what he tries to accomplish as a host of the China Current is to create a coalition of individuals who believe that the world must improve and are participants and not only mere observers of the solution. That can also be said of our panelists in this session. In 2016, our moderator was appointed the WHO Goodwill Ambassador for SDG and Health. And even after being educated at the Royal Academy of Music, Cambridge, and Harvard, he can always do away with the jargon and make complex ideas into more understandable realities. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the most impeccably dressed and equally enticing and insightful Mr. James Chow.
Thank you so much, Shihab. It's such a pleasure to be with everybody and a really deep honor, not only to be with the panelists that we have to bring you today, but also all of you watching at home or wherever you are. Our thoughts very much are with the people in Bangladesh who have gone into another lockdown. And so our very deep appreciation to everyone at the Yunus Center, who despite all the complexities at this last minute, have pulled together what has been a fantastic 2 days so far. And of course, a really great third day so far. We're going to try and today, and I'm going to introduce you to them in just a moment. But before that, let's talk about what we're here to work on. This is not about sitting back and enjoying yourself. This isn't entertainment. This is a pandemic that has ravaged our homes, our communities, the people that we love the most for a year and a half. And in that sense, about almost a year and a half ago, when this started unfolding, Professor Yunus started talking to all of us about a COVID-19 vaccine, even before any vaccine was developed. What was it going to be? When was it going to come? And when it arrives, how are we going to make it accessible and free of charge to everybody all around the world? I think we are at pains to admit that there's been a great moral failure in the last 18 months, but we'll have plenty of time to work on the solutions, coming up with the fantastic people that we have. Let's go right back to the beginning, though. We've got a special video that was created for you by Yunus Center and Grameen Creative Lab. And if we can say once upon a time, it goes into a story that tells you about the beginnings, the people, and the communities that we try to serve.
Out of the Colloquium 51, during the Summer of Purpose, a creative, dynamic, and interdisciplinary dialogue about learnings, perspectives, and purpose led to a conclusion of concrete action plans and the agreement that there is no going back after the corona pandemic.
The pandemic is going on, but still we have not resolved the issue. And then again, another painful thing comes around the corona vaccine.
As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc across Mother Earth, everyone converges on the idea that ultimately the only way to definitively eradicate the pandemic is to have a vaccine.
We are thinking about how to make it available to everybody, because this is the only way we can end the pandemic. We can come to the end of the whole panic that is created and the disaster that is created.
The pandemic clearly exposes the strengths and weaknesses of healthcare systems in different countries, as well as the obstacles and inequities of access to healthcare. Governments, foundations, international financial organizations should work out details of how to make the vaccines available free of cost. We appeal to them and charity organizations, philanthropist individuals, and social businesses to come forward to produce and/or distribute the vaccines all over the world.
Everybody can produce it wherever they want. There's no licensing of it. There is no patent right to it. It's an open source product.
We invite all entities to reaffirm our collective responsibility for the protection of all vulnerable persons related to poverty, discrimination, gender, illness, loss of autonomy, or age. We must work out an unambiguous procedure to determine what would be a fair level of this return in exchange for putting the vaccine in the public domain. Information issued by the private sector, scientists, and authorities needs to be timely, accurate, clear, complete, and transparent.
It should be a common good that should be announced now before it's too late. Unless we do that, privileged people will have access to it, and bulk of the population will not have that.
We urge the World Health Organization to design a World Action Plan. We appeal to them to set up an international committee responsible for monitoring the vaccine research. We appeal to all world leaders, Secretary General of the United Nations, Director General of the World Health Organization, religious, social, moral leaders, leaders of research laboratories, pharmaceutical companies, and media leaders to join hands to ensure that in the case of COVID-19 vaccine, we have a global consensus for free universal access, far ahead of its actual production and distribution. We, the undersigned, ask you to sign this appeal at www.vaccinecommongood.org.
And every single one of those names that you saw there at the end represents a person, an organization, and a movement that really wanted to add to that very early on when other people were not talking about vaccines. Let's talk about what's going to be coming up ahead. We are going to be hearing from Marina Mahathir. Welcome, Marina. She's a social activist over in Malaysia and one of our key signatories. Nabil Ahmed, the head of executive strategy and communications at Oxfam International. International. We also have Enzo Curcio, coordinator of the COVID-19 Food Coalition for the FAO. We have a video message from the actress Sharon Stone, Professor Muhammad Yunus, the founder of the Grameen Bank, and very much the person who gathers us all here today, his fellow Nobel Peace Laureate, Dr. Jose Ramos Horta, and former president of Timor-Leste. And we've invited Professor Cam Donaldson to try and bring together our thoughts at the end so that we don't leave as detached as perhaps we were when we came into this, but with some very clear lines of thought on exit. It is my pleasure, though, to first of all introduce you to a friend to all of us here on Social Business Day. Lamia Morshed has for many years been the executive director of the Yunus Center. And I think, if I'm correct, Lamia has only ever worked with Professor Yunus in her entire career. This is her 11th Social Business Day, as it is for all of us. And she really can tell us how this campaign began and what it really means. So, Lamia, welcome. I suppose one good question to start off with will be to ask you about the campaign itself. Why is it called Common Good Vaccines? And what does it really seek to achieve? How did it evolve over the past year plus?
Thank you so much, James. Glad to be here. And basically, as the video pointed out, you saw that was a video from a year ago. Before any vaccines even came online for COVID-19, Professor Yunus was anticipating the situation that this would first be a prolonged healthcare crisis, that is not going to be something that goes away quickly on the one hand, and second, that he had every faith that vaccines would be developed with all the technological capabilities we have, but that once they came online, that we would have a situation of the richest people in the richest country having access to the vaccines, and the people in the less well-off people in developing and developed countries not having that. So this was something he was anticipating already, and he started discussing this before with many of our friends. And on the 28th of June last year, which is exactly a year ago, he launched this appeal to make COVID-19 vaccines a global common good. And the key thing is that it's free of patents, accessible to everyone, everywhere. And the reason we call it a global common good, there is a precedent of this, which he was quoting a lot in those days, which is that the polio vaccine developed by Jonathan Salk was declared a global common good, which means they asked him, will you patent it? He said, can you patent the sun? So this is where it comes from. This is something we are coming together in a humanitarian global crisis. It's not business as usual, and this is why we should have it as a global common good. So we launched this appeal on the 28th of June, and it was directed to world leaders, to the Secretary General of the UN, to the WHO, to join hands to ensure that in case of a COVID-19 vaccine, we would have a global consensus for free universal access, free of patents, and far ahead of its actual production and distribution. This appeal also centered towards governments, foundations, charities, and philanthropists, individuals, also social businesses, to come forward to produce and to distribute the vaccines all over the world. Immediately that we launched this appeal, 128 global leaders and signatories, global leaders and influencers and celebrities signed up to this. And less than a month later, we had 155 dignitaries signing up to the petition. So this was a phenomenal response because we just got in touch and people responded. There were also efforts in September of that year to file a resolution at the UN General Assembly through many countries to make vaccine a global common good. And Dr. Jose Ramos Horta and many other of our friends were involved in those efforts, but that was not ultimately successful. Professor Yunus and Yunus Center also joined the coalition of the People's Vaccine Alliance, which Nabil here is representing, and Winnie spoke at the opening, which is a consortium of 60 plus organizations with a similar goal of creating a people's vaccine, and with the activism, reach, and concern to make sure that the vaccine is reached to everybody, everywhere. There were also individual online campaigns, one led by the Yunus Center, which garnered 1.2 million signatures around the world in support of a global common good vaccine. And again, with the PVA, with the People's Vaccine Alliance and other similar campaign that reached 2.7 million signatures targeted to the G7 and to big pharma CEOs. Throughout the past year, there have been multiple campaigns on the ground, demonstrations, online campaigns, and so on, and many media interviews and media engagements around this. The one significant development has been the US government in May announcing a TRIPS waiver, their support to a TRIPS waiver to temporarily lift patents for COVID-19 vaccines, but that has faced opposition from other countries who also need to agree if this is to go forward. So what is the situation today? We have a situation today where a country like the US has 63% of all eligible citizens having had at least one vaccine dose, and a country like my country, Bangladesh, where less than 2% have been vaccinated. At the same time, we heard in April from the PVA that 3 pharma companies producing these COVID-19 vaccines declared payouts equivalent to US $26 billion, 3 of the COVID-19 vaccines for the 12 months preceding. And that was enough to vaccinate 1.3 billion people, equal to the population of Africa. So this is the situation that we have, and the fight still goes on. And we also know that with new and more virulent strains and the prolongation of the pandemic, no one in the developed countries can be safe unless all those of us in developing countries are safe. And so we need to keep this campaign up, and the voices of all those who are here today to continue to speak loudly on this issue. Also those who are in the audience to get involved and engage in this campaign. Thanks.
Lamia, I wanted to ask you very quickly about some of the signatories. I know that you worked very hard, as did Enzo, who we'll be hearing from later, to craft these names and to put them together. Who were they? And I think there was a story about Peter Gabriel, the recording artist, who you didn't reach out to, but in fact reached out to the campaign as a private individual himself. What did that tell you when that happened?
So we have 156 signatories today. It was 128 by the time we announced this on June 28. This included 25 Nobel laureates, such as Dr. Jose Ramos Horta, Jody Williams, Lima Gawowi, Desmond Tutu, Malala Yousafzai, Nadia Murad, and many others. Not just peace laureates, but laureates from many fields, including medicine and physics and so on. We had 33 former heads of state and government, such as Helen Clark, Mahathir Mohamad, Gordon Brown, Mary Robinson, Lula da Silva, and many others. We had activists and celebrities like Sharon Stone, who will be speaking to us at this panel later today, George Clooney, Matt Damon, Lily Cole, Forrest Whitaker, artists like Peter Gabriel, you mentioned, Richard Curtis, Bono, Andrea Bocelli. And also, interestingly, business leaders who came to us immediately to sign, like Narayan Murthy, the founder of Infosys, Ratan Tata, Sir Richard Branson, Mo Ibrahim, Paul Polman, Azim Premji, Emmanuel Faber, and many others. And then, of course, other personalities like Jimmy Wales, the president of the IOC. He was one of the people who said, I would like to sign this before we approached him. Rahul Gandhi, Salman Khan, Jeffrey Sachs, and many more. Peter Gabriel was funny because we were just looking on the day after at the online petition. A few people had signed up to the online. This is not those who were invited. And I saw Peter Gabriel and his company mentioned, and we had been in touch before. So I wrote to him and I said, I see a name, is this you? And he said, yes, it's me. And he, by that time, had already put this on his social media and his Twitter because he felt he took immediate ownership of this. Even though, again, as I said, it was very early on, we had not seen vaccines, it immediately struck a chord with him. And he said that I would like to promote this. And very humbly, he didn't want us to put him on social media. He put it out himself. And we had many others like this who took ownership of this campaign. And it became something that sounded very strange before, that it should be a global common good, but it was something that the public took up very quickly all around the world, I would say.
Well, Lamia, that's what's so beautiful about, the work that Professor Yunus does. He gathers us not only in numbers, but gathers us in a certain spirit of humility and graciousness. And when we were speaking with the Greater China Forum during the Social Business Summit earlier today, that was a point that came up again and again. Clearly, there are people who have influence in their own particular fields, some with mass popular appeal, like Peter Gabriel. But, we are equal. and each life is very precious, and that vaccine campaign reminds us of precisely that. Thank you very much, Lamia, in what you do. Can I link your voice then to Marina Mahathir, a great friend to many of us watching? Marina, as you know, I mean, I knew Marina initially through the struggle and the ongoing fight against HIV and AIDS and for the rights of people there. But of course, she's worked right across the field with women and Muslim populations. I mean, the list goes on and on. But I think really, Marina, the essential point is fighting for the dignity of the individual and finding a way to multiply that. I want to ask you, why did you choose to take part in this campaign? It may seem obvious, but there are clearly many people who would not add their name to a campaign such as this. Why did you add your campaign? And you brought your father, the former Prime Minister, onto this as well.
Well, hi, James, and hi, everyone. Well, you know, I worked in HIV/AIDS for 12 years, and I saw the parallels between the issues we faced then and what we're facing now. Most of the people who suffered from HIV live in the developing world, yet when treatments were available, they couldn't get them because of the prohibitive costs. And it took a global campaign for treatment access, plus the threat by some governments to invoke compulsory licensing of the antiretroviral drugs, that got treatment to people who previously had no access. So it was really a case of the minority getting more than the majority simply because of the cost. It was a very clear rich-poor divide. And I think global pandemics need global solutions, and those solutions must treat everyone equally, as you said, because everyone has a right to dignity, to life. And, you know, with HIV, we had no vaccine then, but and we still don't actually. But with COVID, there are preventative vaccines, which is really, you know, the whole idea of prevention is better than cure. That's you know, that's very clear. So we can only restore the world to health if everybody gets the vaccines. It doesn't make sense otherwise. And that's why I thought this campaign is very good. It's a no-brainer and needs to be supported by everyone. And for my dad, it was obvious. I didn't need to convince him at all. He really does believe that this is something to be supported and that, you know, everyone needs to get on board.
Thanks very much for that, Marina. There are other questions I want to ask you. Before I get to that, I want to quickly ask you, though, I know that you and I didn't grow up with social media, but you're particularly good at connecting with people. And I've seen that socially, and I've seen that at civil society levels that you've worked in, the way people really respect you. So my question would be, how do we get people to respect a vaccine for all? How do we get people to take ownership of it? So we're not asking them, please sign this campaign. We want to give this to them and say, you take it and you run away with it. And that's the most effective way forward. How do you do that?
Well, I think, you know, if one thing that the COVID has done is that it's really united everyone in the world because it's affected everyone in the world. And I think a lot of people do understand that, you know, there's no point in hoarding vaccines. There's no point in having some people getting access to treatment and everything, and other people, other people not. Because if you want, especially if you want to travel, you don't want to go to a place where people are unvaccinated and have no treatment or anything. You want to go where people have vaccines and everything. And, you know, if you don't distribute it all over the world equally, then you're going to have very limited options of where you go, right? So I think, you know, if it's clearly explained to everyone, I don't think anyone has any issue with an equitable distribution of the vaccine at a cost that is, you know, viable for everyone.
Let me talk to you about Dr. Tedros, because the campaign video mentions him. And he was pretty angry and ticked off the other day. Again, they were asking him about vaccine hesitancy. And I think he found it quite patronizing. Why do you talk to us about vaccine hesitancy when those communities don't even have access to a vaccine to be hesitant about? I mean, it's almost as if vaccine hesitancy is a luxury. And I think it connects with so many of the points around colonialism and the colonization of global health that we are only beginning to recognize. You don't want to have Black Lives Matter, you don't want to have Me Too and all these things unless you can apply it across the board and see how that really works. So in full solidarity with all of those movements, Marina, is it just a question of access, or do we need to even hold our own governments, even in middle and low income countries, to further account as well? Are they serving their people?
Oh, absolutely. Take my country, Malaysia. We're having a terrible pandemic right now. We were doing very well last year, and this year we're just, we've had 5,000 deaths over, most of it this year, and that's partly because of the way the whole pandemic has been managed, and also because of the lack of vaccines. Partly it's a question of supply. We haven't had the supplies of vaccines that we need for the same reasons that we've all been talking about, that some countries are taking more than they actually need, but also within the country, the system of distribution, the vaccination programs has not worked as smoothly and as efficiently as we would like. So at the moment, only 6.6% of our people have been fully vaccinated, and that's not good enough. In terms of so-called vaccine hesitancy, we disproved that very quickly. People were wary because of these stories coming out of the West about the side effects of some of the vaccines. But once the government opened up a program where people could opt in for the AstraZeneca, for example, there were queues. And all the applications on the website caused the website to crash within just an hour or so because everybody wanted it. There is no shortage of demand for the vaccine in our countries. It's just a matter of getting the vaccines here and then getting the vaccines into the arms of people, because they're no good unless they're in somebody's arm, right? So yeah, that's really the situation.
And may I quickly ask, because your parents, as we all know, are well into their 90s, and God bless them with great health always. I'm sure, I know that they have people to help them with technology and with booking COVID appointments, COVID vaccines. I heard that the interface, the application to book was not easy. And had they not had people to help them, what do you do if you don't have all that technology?
Exactly. And my parents, they're very privileged, obviously, and they got the vaccines very early. They've had their 2 doses way back in February or so. But there's so many people in my country, even in Malaysia, which is a middle income country where a lot of people have phones and have internet access. Still, there are lots of groups of people who just can't manage the system. We have to go online to register. We have to wait for our appointments. And everything online. And for a lot of older people or people in rural areas, they just don't have the internet savvy, if you like, to manage all that. And therefore, people have been missing appointments, or even the question of getting to the vaccine center. It costs money to get to the vaccine center. So now we're trying, NGOs and the government, we're trying to more or less get the mountain to Muhammad, getting people out there to give the vaccines rather than waiting for them to come. Because, like I said, it's no good unless it's in someone's arm.
I've never heard that expression, getting the mountain to Muhammad. How about we get the mountain to Marina, and you can help us put it out over there. But you know, Marina, it's not just the rural populations. I can tell you from my mother, for example, who lives in the urban center of an urban center here in Hong Kong, she would have great difficulty booking for herself, and then would need to rely on somebody. And if you change it, and that will be another point of contention there. Marina Mahathir, thank you very much for being with us, and please do stay with us as we progress the conversation to another friend of ours, Nabil Ahmed, who, as I said, is with Oxfam International. I presume, Nabil, that you're over in London right now, but there, and also as an individual, he's been a key figure in the People's Vaccine Alliance. So let's just quickly unpack this. It's very, very simple. There was the UNIS campaign for making COVID-19 vaccines a global common good. And then there was the UNAIDS and Oxfam campaign called People's Vaccine Alliance. They were slightly different in that the UNIS campaign was really free in spirit, whereas the People's Vaccine campaign was also working with governments. But at some point, there was this beautiful convergence that occurred along the way. The spirit, the message, and also the goal is very, very much in alignment. And Nabil, in speaking of the alliance, or the People's Vaccine Alliance, where are we at right now? And what can you tell us about that? And then I'll go to the next question for you.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. And thank you for having me. You're right to call this an alliance that's grown into a movement. It's so inspiring to see hundreds of organizations, prominent individuals, world leaders such as the president of South Africa, and millions of people campaigning around the world for a people's vaccine. And you mentioned the vaccine common good. I mean, what a moment it was, and what an honor it was to have Professor Muhammad Yunus at the fore of this effort, joining efforts, converging. And that was really a massive moment in sparking this movement that we have today. What unites us, James, is something that's really common sense. We want a safe and effective vaccine for everyone, everywhere. We want to save lives. We want the pandemic to end, not just for people in the richest countries and not just for the richest people, but for everyone. And together we've campaigned, we've hit the streets, we've produced hard-hitting research, we've won the support of many people, including current world leaders. And we're now in a place, you asked me about progress, where we've seen the People's Vaccine play its part in helping to shift the position of people like Presidents Biden and Macron and many others. But there's a part of me that wishes to celebrate and wishes to talk about the successes, but I feel there's very, very little to actually celebrate right now. And just to share some data with you, 0.3% of the world's vaccines have gone to low-income countries, and at current rates, I'm going to have to read this twice because you won't believe me, at current rates it will take 57 years for low-income countries to be able to vaccinate their populations. And I'm based actually here in East Africa, not in London, but here you just looking at Uganda here, one of those countries with hardly any vaccines, right? We're seeing how it's all but run out of medical oxygen. Hospitals are full. The scarce intensive care facilities are inundated. We all watched in horror just about a year ago how some of the world's best health systems were overcome by this virus. And now we're at a point where we're seeing some of the world's weakest health systems hit by the virus. It's very hard for me just to overstate just how worrying the current situation is, James and friends here. But across Africa, cases and deaths are up 40% just in the last week alone. We're looking at Latin America. Indonesia, as the IFRC said, is on the edge of catastrophe. What's really crucial for me to say here today is that this is not some force of nature that's making this happen. It's down to man-made decisions. The world could have been making billions more safe and effective vaccines right now. Qualified, capable manufacturers around the world, ready to go. The solutions are there. But I think in what will be remembered as perhaps one of the cruelest acts of recent history, a handful of rich country leaders have decided to resist granting developing countries the rights and the recipes to be able to produce their own vaccines. And instead, they're standing by these pharmaceutical monopolies, which are artificially restricting vaccine supplies. And I think that's why we've reached this frightening new phase in the pandemic. And it's bad for us all, not just for people in poor countries, because it fuels new variants and it continues and prolongs the economic downturn. And just a final word on this, and it is about the progress James, that you nicely put in the question is, I do feel that a year ago, our biggest barrier to defeating this disease, it was science. Can the world develop a vaccine? Today, our biggest barrier to defeating this virus, it's monopolies and it's vaccine apartheid.
Well, Nabil, I mean, everybody would have seen it probably in your newspapers that the chief medical officer, Chris Whitty, over in the UK, was attacked for a fourth time, physically assaulted outside of his home. That someone would give their life and their career to the service of people, for that to be paid back with abuse and intimidation, I think is quite terrifying. But, I feel sorry for people on different levels, Nabil. I feel sorry for some of the rich countries that you talked about. I think some of those people have been conned into thinking that the vaccines were their savior, when in fact so many of them had to die before people woke up and then provided them with the vaccines. And I have to ask you about this, since you've already brought up the awkwardness of this. I mean, when the G7 leaders in Cornwall promised their 1 billion doses and made a very, very big show of it as well, without recognizing that by hoarding the vaccines, they had helped create some of the variants that we see today and left people terribly exposed right now. We saw people like Professor Yunus going against the grain, not joining those celebrations, instead asking in a commentary on Al Jazeera television, well, where were you for the last year? Where was your moral leadership over the last year? Completely absent, of course. I think it's probably important to ask you two things. Where have those 1 billion doses gone to? I see that there may have been some slight movement, but that was promised over 2 weeks ago. And secondly, what happened to this much heralded waiver, this patent waiver that the new US administration promised a couple of months ago, or I think it was in early May? What's happened on those fronts?
Yeah, absolutely, James. Really important questions. Gordon Brown, the former British Prime Minister, described what the G7 did, and these aren't my words. Gordon Brown's words were as an unforgivable moral failure, and it's very hard to disagree with that. There is a commitment on donations, and donations of vaccines are clearly very important, but we dig deeper into these promises, and some of them are repeated promises that we've had already, and if you're looking at the timeline that we're looking at by the end of 2022. So on the donations front, what we need is, rich countries which are hoarding vaccines for their citizens, we want them to be able to donate the excess supplies of those vaccines now, not by the end of next year. But taking a step back there, you've talked about the waiver there, James. We have to be very clear that donations, charity alone is not going to fix this crisis. The pandemic will only end once developing countries have their own reliable and sufficient supply of vaccines. That's why we need to do everything we can to support their manufacturing. I said the solutions are there, and there are 3 critical steps, and I can just cover them. The first is on the technology transfer. That means rich countries insisting that their pharmaceutical corporations get around the table and share their technology, share the vaccine recipes with other capable, qualified manufacturers around the world. And the World Health Organization has a facility to do this, which Dr. Tedros and many others have championed, called the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. Yet I have to be clear that not one pharma corporation has yet joined that, and that's a first step. That can happen today with a political will. The second is the waiver, the famous waiver that you've mentioned here. And we need to expedite this intellectual property waiver on COVID-19 vaccines and technologies. Negotiations have begun. We haven't got months to wait on this. With a political will, that does need to be expedited. We need a wide waiver. Credit to Presidents Biden and now Macron of the rich countries supporting this. But it's very sad and very disappointing to see countries, including Germany and the UK, continuing to resist that proposal there. So that needs to be overcome. And the third part is money. It's investment. It's investment in repurposing and building the vaccine production capacity, particularly in the developing world, to be able to overcome this virus. But James, these are the solutions: the waiver, the technology transfer, the investment. But taking a step back, what this really is about governments taking control of the situation, not leaving it to a handful of pharmaceutical corporations to literally decide how many vaccines get made, who gets them, and what to price them at. Remember that over $100 billion of taxpayers' funding paid for developing these vaccines. Governments bore the risk. And not only that, we have to be clear that, pharmaceutical corporations, that their leaders are not going to be worried about going hungry at night as a result of these proposals. They will still be generously compensated. But the question is it going to be on a basis of monopoly, or is it going to be a basis of fairness? Our task right now, James, it just could not be more urgent. We've lost too much time already. We're at a stage of seeing avoidable deaths. We've lost too many loved ones. We can't bring them back from the dead, but we can save the living. And we need governments to make the right choices today. And I'm very confident with the movement that now exists around the world that this is an issue that we can win.
A lot of thoughts come up and a whole Rolodex of memories over the last weeks and months come up as you speak, Nabil. Thank you to everybody at the People's Vaccine Alliance, led by Oxfam and UNAIDS. I know that you do these weekly calls and that so many people join them. They're so diligently structured and people really do attend and contribute to that. And speaking of PVA, the People's Vaccine Alliance, I used to call it the Yunus campaign, but I know that Professor Yunus wouldn't like that. So just to decipher that, he might allow me to say the Yunus-led campaign, but he said from day one that it's a campaign for everybody, both in terms of membership, but also in terms of responsibility and ownership. Thank you, Nabil. Let's go now to Enzo Curcio, who is a journalist and a human rights activist. I'm guessing, Enzo, that you are over in Rome, my friend, but I know that you have been so fundamental to gathering people and to securing, if not just the signatures, but also the very strong public statements of support, including from the Holy Father, Pope Francis. Perhaps you can talk a bit about that first.
Oh, thank you, James. I would like also to add something on what about Nabil just said. I'm just here in Matera, in the south of Italy, where yesterday happened the G20 summit of the foreign ministry of the G20, and it was the most important gathering before the G20 that will be held in Rome in October. So one of the topics of the foreign ministers meeting was the vaccine, but of course, in the final declaration, also in the Matera meeting, was generically reported as commitments to assure the vaccine to all. So we starting our campaign from few people at the beginning. It was a huge struggle. Today we have this tremendous support. But in the same time, we are at the beginning of our struggle, let me say. When Professor Yunus for the first time wrote an article on the Vatican newspaper, Osservatore Romano, we organized around this article a movement beyond to convince Pope Francis to make the first public commitment on the vaccine global common good, and in March 2020, and the Holy Father immediately pronounced his first speech that convinces also to Italian government to align their politics on the vaccine common good. It was the beginning of our campaign. And but from this beginning, we achieved a lot of goals that was mentioned by Nabil with this global alliance. But now we are at beginning of a new kind of challenge, because first of all, we are many powerful countries that decided to support the idea of a Biden administration of the waiver patent. But in the meantime, we have more powerful, big countries that are also developing countries that they need to support a multilateral solution. Because for the next few months, we will have also approved many other vaccines, more than 15 mono-dose vaccine, that they will be also easy to produce also in developing countries. So at the crucial moment to discuss the moratory, the waiver on patent will be in the next 4-5 months. Principally, I would like to highlight, because I wish to appeal to make a common effort on it. Principally during the G20 summit that will be held at the end of October in Rome, where the G20 is not only a meeting of the richest country, but is in the meeting of the richest countries, the countries that most need of a vaccine. So I think that our common efforts has to be concentrated also on this meeting, on the General Assembly of UN, that is another multilateral moment, and on the G20, where developing countries and the richest countries, they will meet on the post-pandemic and on the pandemic topic. Sorry that I cannot respond immediately to your question, but Nabil excited me to add something on his speech. So, but I would like to say that in our campaign, a single person can make a difference. We are now more than 2.7, Lamia mentioned at the beginning, but each of these 2.7 million make a difference from now to the next months, to the next meetings, to the next international gathering that will have the topic of not only to respond to the recovery phase of the pandemic as the center of the discussion.
Okay, so Enzio, let's look at this a little bit further. I know that your appeal is not only within Italy, of course, you know, the depth of the G20 is one example, and not only in the Vatican, but the Roman Catholic Church is very important. We saw in the response to AIDS and also in Ebola, how important faith leadership is, how it can reach out to communities in a way that even elected political leaders can't. In that sense, the Vatican and its figures represent the interests and concerns of 1.2 billion Roman Catholics. Now, they're all around the world. They are the alliance in itself, and they represent a whole range of socioeconomic backgrounds in their own homes. What has the feedback been from the Roman Catholic Church to this campaign? Now, we know that the Pope is strong on poverty. We know that he's strong on net carbon emissions. We know that he's personally strong on calling for a people's vaccine. But what has the wider response been, and what can we take from that?
Thank you, James. Pope Francis is very clear about that. He's for the vaccine, that he wants that the international community can declare the COVID-19 vaccine as a common good. So another state that can support the policy about the waiver on the patent for sure is the Holy See. And let me say also that the Vatican was also the first country in the world that established a COVID-19 commission immediately after 2 months of the pandemic. The Pope Francis ordered to the Pontifical Ministry of the Human Development, presided by Cardinal Turkson, to build a COVID-19 task force and COVID-19 commission in different sectors: security, health, response, recovery, and this with the goal to elaborate 20 points to face the pandemic. And at the center of this commission was the efforts to declare the vaccine as a common good. So Vatican is, let me say, is one of the first countries in the world that support our campaign, and not only supporting beyond, but also to supporting institutional, because the Vatican is a member of many multilateral institutions, and also is an influent member is an influent neighbor of another country, that is Italy, of my country. So, and this is very important also because Italy is a member of European Union, and together with Macron, as Nabil said, together with Macron, they pushed also at the level of the EU the position of Vatican, also that is also the position of the Italian government on the waiver on the patent on the on COVID-19 vaccine. So this is the position of Pope Francis is very crucial for the 1 billion of Catholics, but is very crucial also for many key governments, including Germany, that now have another kind of position. I would like, sorry, James, I just would like to highlight about the Vatican also some proposal that I wish to present to all of you and to principal to Professor Yunus, that Italy and Rome is really pleased to host if we wish to organize a vaccine common good summit that collect all of the NGOs, all of the personalities that make the efforts to build this kind of movement first. And second, also the Vatican press is ready also to give all of the support, because we have another kind of luck in our campaign, because pharmaceutical industries most probably are bigger than us economically, but not morally, let me say. We have a lack of presence of the global press. We have a tremendous support by the most important leaders of our heart, but the international media cannot are involved to spread our message. This is, to me, also another change that we have to do. And let me say again, each of us can make a difference, because we are not Don Quixote against the windmills. We are not Don Quixote. Each of us can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enzo, and for all the work that you have done for all of us around the world. I want to ask us to turn our gaze now to the screen, where we're now going to have a video message from Sharon Stone. Of course, many people know her as an award-winning film actor. And I think it also speaks to the importance, again, of reaching out into different communities in different ways. And especially at a time when we're trying to combat the surge and the sheer load of information, including disinformation on social media. Sometimes we do need to sit back, take a little bit of space, and listen to the words of wisdom and clarity that come from individuals such as her.
Good afternoon, I'm Sharon Stone, and I would of course like to start by saying happy birthday to my dear, dear friend, Muhammad Yunus. The economic and social disruption caused by the pandemic pushed millions of people at risk of falling into extreme poverty. However, thanks to unprecedented scientific efforts, COVID-19 vaccines are now being distributed in more than 70 countries globally, with health workers, elderly, and vulnerable people placed among the first groups to receive them. COVID-19 vaccines provide a pathway out of this pandemic and prevent huge economic losses, which may trigger disparities and wealth inequities across society. Vaccine pharmaceutical companies estimated to make sufficient doses to cater to 1/3 of the world population by the end of 2021, most of which have already been pre-ordered by developed countries. This means lower income countries may need to wait until 2023 for the vaccine. Rich countries also have better medical infrastructure and more resources to provide vaccination to their citizens by facilitating mass vaccination programs. So such a delay in supplying the vaccine doses is unacceptable. It is unacceptable first for health reasons, because virus variants are more likely to appear in places where the outbreak is out of control, increasing the number of sick people and making vaccines less effective, or even worse. For ethical reasons, moral responsibility does not and cannot stop at our country's borders. The value of a person's life cannot depend on where they live. It is unacceptable for economic reasons. Vaccine nationalism could cost the global economy up to $1.2 trillion a year in GDP. So until the poorest countries can access vaccines, the world could lose between $60 billion and $340 billion a year in GDP. Too often as individuals, we feel so powerless against big global challenges and their complexity. Nonetheless, the examples that we did with our campaign show that we can contribute to change direction, telling how important practical contribution is in dealing with these global challenges like the COVID-19 vaccine equitable access. A fundamental step to do in our mindset and continue to shift it out goodwill in actions. Shifting from intention to action means continuing embracing and promoting our campaign for the vaccine as a common good. We often think that someone else or some big conglomerate or some giant political force is going to do all of this for us. It has certainly been our experience, and by our, I mean Muhammad Yunus and Enzo Curcio and myself. It has been our experience that it takes the individual, and it takes an individual like Muhammad Yunus or a few individuals to get the ball rolling. And it really only takes an individual, you, to make a concerted effort for these things to practically occur. I'm a kid from a small town in Pennsylvania, one who certainly, as a woman and certainly as a small town kid, I don't think anyone ever expected to make a mark, make an effort, spend my life working on infectious disease, which I did while I worked on the platform of HIV/AIDS, which has led me very specifically into working on infectious disease overall, and has led me to work on creating a platform for the COVID vaccine as a common good. It is clear to me, with the rapidity with which we were able to get a COVID vaccine, that all of this is really possible. It is only in this last year that we completed vaccines for polio as a common good. And I know that you can think and understand how long that has taken and how unnecessary all of that has been. I feel that it is unnecessary in general that we do not vaccinate globally as a common good each and every time we understand that we have a death-defying infectious disease. So I would like to say thank you for listening to this plea. Thank you for understanding that infectious disease is a common goal. It's a common understanding that when we look at infectious disease, it's not the individual that it will affect, or a certain part of our humanity, or a certain type of person in our humanity. Infectious disease infects each and every one of us exactly the same. I have learned this the hard way while spending 30, 35 years working on HIV/AIDS, and now I am spending my time working on COVID-19 vaccine as a common good. So I ask you as an individual to join us and do what is the best for us economically, the best for us socially, and the best for us in our human integrity to cure this infectious disease so that we may be moving forward and be prepared for the next one. Because as we have learned from polio and HIV/AIDS, COVID, and many others, they just keep on coming. So with your help, let's keep on ending them, and let's keep on living happy, healthy, and free. I wish you all the very best, and I wish you all to join me in wishing Muhammad Yunus a very happy birthday week. Thank you. I wish you a lot of peace and a lot of love.
Thank you very much to Sharon Stone for taking that time to make a very important contribution to that. Professor Yunus, I don't think you want us to sing happy birthday to you, but we can always arrange that at the end of this session. Professor Yunus, thank you for bringing us together, and thank you for creating this global common good vaccines campaign over the past year. I just want to connect that voice to Sharon Stone. She speaks to the individual. She appealed to their senses, to their capacities, to their hearts, to try and do something for the campaign. If you are someone who is watching right now, and there are people who have said, what can I do? So can I throw that to you, her challenge and what we're already seeing on the Zoom chat? If you're not a public health specialist, if you're not part of the UN, if you don't have a platform like Marina, for example, or like Nabil and Enzo or Lamia, what can you do?
Well, you signed the petition that we have been circulating. This is one. This as an individual. Or you can make your own petition. Go ahead and tell people of the world what you feel as a citizen, as a world citizen. You can always make that. When we first sent out the appeal, that was the only thing we had in mind. We didn't think that one letter will do everything. Simply that we thought some people will sign it up and will bring up the subject when that subject was not yet opened. This is vaccine was not even in preparation yet, just a design stage and so on. There's a speculation that the vaccine may come at the end of the year, and some speculating that we may be in the middle of the next year. So that's the time we thought it's something very important to raise this issue about the patent right, intellectual property right. That's what we did. So individuals make a very important contribution making that happen. If we make, like in the countries that you mentioned and speakers mentioned, like USA has done already, UK, Germany. If the citizens of those countries start saying things which government didn't do the right thing, probably it will have some political impact in that. So this is very important that we raise this voice and keep on moving. Don't give up.
And if we may also add to this, rather than take you separately, but to engage you both in conversation, to welcome again Dr. Jose Ramos Horta. Thank you so much for being with us and for adding your important global leadership to this campaign and to much, much more, not only this campaign. If we could ask you, Mr. Ramos Horta, perhaps the same question. I mean, you work with young people. Your country is full of young people in itself. What would you tell people of different ages, but individuals, what can they do? So Professor Yunus has spoken about signing up to the campaign, but he had a very clever idea. Set up your own campaign, spread the seed, keep on letting it multiply. What would some of the ideas that you may share with us, Dr. Ramos Horta?
Thank you. Thank you again, Yunus, and everybody else for the great moral leadership. I consider Muhammad to be a mentor of mine, and I have been reading from him, about him, for over 20 years. And he visited me before he won the Nobel Peace Prize and helped setting up here the microcredit initiatives here. So I'm always guided by Muhammad, and together we have done things on Myanmar and of course now on COVID. Well, I'm speaking also, I could say, on behalf of the G7 plus fragile states. I'm a special envoy of this intergovernmental group called G7 plus. Do not confuse with G7 industrial countries. We are made up of more than 20 countries, population altogether several hundred million, who live in fragile countries, from Timor-Leste to Nepal to Afghanistan. In Latin America, Caribbean, only Haiti is a member of it. And then across Africa, which includes DRC, Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, Côte d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, etc. And this is a multilateral institution that was initiated by Timor-Leste and now is an official partner of the UN with observer status, an official partner of the European Union. And I think the Secretary General of the G7 Plus is attending this conference out of his office, our office in Lisbon, the Secretariat, which is a European hub for the group. Professor Elder Costa is Timorese. I think he said he signed up already, so he is listening. So I can speak for these hundreds of millions of people, which you all have talked about, the speakers, in terms of people who are at the tail end of the vaccine and even tail end of COVAX, because as much as I commend COVAX initiative and COVAX leadership in the person of President Durão Barroso, former President of the European Commission, they also struggle to get donor countries to contribute financially and with vaccines. And we, Timor-Leste, like all other countries, we get only 20% of available vaccines from the COVAX arrangement, and we have been receiving. If it were not for Australia also supporting COVAX and supporting us bilaterally, we would be in very bad shape, like hundreds of millions of developing countries. So it is, and I have to say, we have to look at why this failed. I think, I don't want to put all blame on Donald Trump, but remember, for 4 years, he was the president of the United States, and he did everything possible to weaken the United Nations system, attack WHO, other multilateral bodies, attack the European Union. He tried to completely disassemble the European Union, NATO, and many in Europe went along with it. So the UK, which was under David Cameron, made the UK the only G7 industrial countries that increased their ODA to 0.7%. That was the only G7 country under David Cameron and in the midst of the economic crisis in Europe, in UK. And so David Cameron is out, came Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson was busier trying to get UK out of the European Union. And the UK has been bogged down with, till today, with the problem of Brexit. And then the rest of Europe, people struggling with their situations. And so we end up, I wouldn't say leaderless. The word is that the UN weakened without strong financial support. Let's also be critical, self-critical of our leaders in the developing world. Why the last 30 years, for instance, we have failed to provide our peoples in the global south with adequate health systems, with adequate scientific medical research. Like, for instance, look at Cuba. Under sanctions from the United States for the past 60 years, they have developed their own vaccines. But because of their extreme difficulties, they are not able to provide to anyone so far, outside Cuba. And they have been extremely meticulous in doing the trials, and they already vaccinating their people. But why not India being more effective? And let's remember, then me first is not only United States and not only Europe. The moment COVID struck hard India, Indian leaders said, we are going to vaccinate our people first. So Nepal was abandoned, Maldives abandoned. So it's not only like, all the sins are in the West and all the virtues are in the global South. We, Mohammed, with your incredible moral leadership, we have to reach out more, not only to, of course, to the leaders of the states, the government, but yes, precisely, as we are speaking, to the common people, to put in Europe, in the United States, in North America, to do more, to accelerate the delivery of, because it's also, I think, it's a logistic nightmare to deliver, to 100 something, to more than 200 countries and territories. It's a logistic nightmare, and so I hesitate to always just criticize these poor leaders in Europe, in the United States, for not doing more. Luckily, Joe Biden came in. He reversed completely policies of his predecessor, and speaking out on lifting intellectual property restrictions on production of vaccines, but that's easier said than done. Where are the facilities for production of a vaccine? In India, again? Well, remember when the COVID crisis started, we are all flabbergasted that China was in control of the supply chain. The Americans almost literally hijacked a plane in Hong Kong with ventilators. Was apparently, it was, I would say literally, they claim that a plane with ventilators, it was theirs. The Turkish stopped a plane on the way to Madrid with ventilators. They said, no, this is ours. Created it was so embarrassing. It was so embarrassing. And that everything was dependent on China. Well, is all the pharmaceuticals are going to be shifted to India? We are going to repeat the same mistake just for the sake of the global South? I'm sorry, we have to look carefully at that. Maybe it would be safer to have some major pharmaceutical company in my country, because we would not be able to dominate anything. We just give the country, give the facilities, you set up here, so that because when you deal with, you give this so much power to a country like India, like China, well, you end up being hostage to their priorities, their first concerns. Their first concern is normal, their own people, and then the rest, if they can. So how to reverse that? Well, this is a chance, as we all been saying, to wake up the world everywhere, so that we transform our societies, the way we are governed, the way we want to be governed, and build a better world. Easier said than done, but it is possible. And last but not least, small good news from my country. Well, we are not doing too bad in terms of COVID prevention and control. Fatality is less than 30, and that including everyone that died with COVID, not directly from COVID. Like, young man, 20 years old, had a traffic accident. He was killed, brain hemorrhage. And then the doctor detected he was COVID positive, so he listed as died with COVID or from COVID. He entered the statistic. But so, including that, we have vaccinated now more than 60% of our people with the first dose. And we are now into the second dose as well. But thanks to COVAX and the particular thanks to Australia that has been providing us with the vaccines, and that includes also New Zealand. The supplies we have been getting is COVAX, Australia, and New Zealand. And China provided us with 100,000 doses of Sinovac. So I cannot fail to acknowledge these people who have been so generous with us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramosota. Professor Yunus, I mean, we're hearing, the very nuanced analysis that a leader like Dr. Ramosota is able to provide us. It's not black and white. It's not necessarily north and south or even east and west. I think Marina also spoke to that point herself. What are some of the solutions that are coming up in your head now? So we are, say, 18 months, give or take, into this pandemic. You warned us when we first sat down to talk about this vaccine campaign that counterfeit products will emerge, people will hoard, the exposing that will leave other populations too. So many of your predictions have been too accurate. And as I said before, I'm sure you wish they were not accurate at all. But given that accuracy, what do you think some of the solutions could be going forward? And how would you respond to what you just heard from Dr. Ramosota?
Well, I go back to what I started out from when the pandemic was just surging around and moving all around the world. And everybody agreed that this is a global phenomenon. Nobody will be spared. And we knew that it will reach every nook and corner of the world, these early days of pandemic. The point I was making all the time that this is already recognized. Pandemic, the COVID-19 is a global enemy. It's not the enemy of Bangladesh, or it's not the enemy of Timor-Leste. It's a global enemy. So if you recognize something as a global enemy, there has to be a global response. It doesn't have to disappear like that, because you cannot control COVID-19 in one country. Maybe for a while, a little bit, but it comes back because everything else is there outside, coming back for you with a vengeance. And it's a common word that was passed around, repeated many times, that I'm not secure unless I secure you. That's a very basic thing about the COVID-19, the pandemic. So I say, if it's a common enemy, where is the, if it is a global enemy, what is the global preparation? I thought the first thing to do is to sit down with a global preparation. It's something that I cannot just do it for myself. It has to be done for everybody. Then it has a solution. Otherwise, it has no solution. That is completely missing even today. Even when the G7 meeting was going on, that's the comment I was making. If it is a global war against this enemy, we have to have a war preparation together and make a plan, country by country, region by region. What is the need? How much you can produce? How much you can supply? What is the supply line? What is the logistics for that? I have not seen a single global plan, country by country, month by month yet, even as a theoretical exercise. And I love fictions. I hope this will even come as a fiction. Numbers are not solid numbers, but some numbers are thrown in. You have a kind of a format that so many vaccines will be needed in order to finish this vaccination by the end of 2022, say, for example. Then we have to speed up like this in country by country. This is how to do. We say, no, we only do it exercise for us. Even if we do it, even for countries, they don't make such an elaborate plan yet. So this end, if you had a plan, we would know the shortages. Where the shortages, country by country, we know the shortage. Month by month, we need the shortages. We're not complaining anybody. We're saying it. What is this plan that we would exercise? The whole problem is we're not looking at this as a global enemy. We're not looking at it as a global solution. That's the core of the problem. We are saying that my family is okay, you can go to hell. No, we have nothing to do with it. So that's the spirit which is killing everybody around the world. So we need to come back to that and make sure. There are many promises made, like UK made promise, Boris Johnson said, by 2022, and we'll finish the vaccination. And that's our promise. What is that? What promise is that? We have nothing. We have no vaccine yet for anybody. And you're saying by the end of 2022, it will be all done. And this is our promise. So this is the empty words that are being said, not concrete thing. If it's a war preparation, where's the war secretariat? We wish WHO could have been the war secretariat. Everybody will join hands and come out with instructions and so on. Government representatives are there. They should be making all the recommendations to the world. No, everybody has to do it. Now we do it city by city, state by state. You do it. We don't know anything about it. So that's not the way it is going to be happening. So that's a problem. And it only gives vaccine companies enormous freedom to do whatever they want. There is no global policy of any kind. What I do, whatever I am producing, who should get it? Is this a vaccine company decide who should get it because the money is the highest bidder will get the thing, or there is another principle that we have to apply? So those are the issues that we have to bring up. Still, we have to do that. This time is not over yet. It may get worse. Like Bangladesh is going through the second upsurge. We're hitting a very high point right now. And some countries going to the third peak. And this is going on. And new variants will come back. And we were talking about the fake vaccines are already in the market. Already there's news coming up. The fake vaccines are being sold. So this will continue to do that. And at the cost of many, many, many people in the world.
Professor Yunus, this is Social Business Day. This is the Social Business Week for everybody. And I can't help thinking that social business can provide some of the solutions to many of the problems that we're discussing now, including the achievement of a global common good vaccine. I don't know whether this sounds ridiculous or not, but can we even create social businesses out of pharmaceuticals or pharmaceuticals into social businesses? Does it work that way?
Yeah, we have been talking about it for a long time. Now it became a very strong voice. We had a whole session on that to create social business pharmaceutical company, because if profit is the problem, where these vaccine companies only running after the profit and they don't look after the lives of the people. The solution is we create alternative pharmaceutical company as a social business company where we are not interested in making any profit whatsoever. So we concentrate on the solution part of it, how to reach the people who cannot afford, how to reach the people who are far, far away from us, how to do that. And if you can do it, this is one attempt we are making to create a global social business pharmaceutical company. And if you can design one and put it into action, then we can have many such a global social business pharmaceutical company, not only for vaccines, for drugs. Medicine is a very, very complicated thing for the whole world. The whole health sector is damaged tremendously because of the policies pursued by the pharmaceutical companies in charging the prices of the vaccines, medicines, and so on. So if you create the social business vaccine company with the drug company, to bring the sanity in the whole sector. The sanity has disappeared. So that's what we have to restore. We have to bring it back. And it's a very important point that you raised that make that happen.
Dr. Ramos Horta, I mean, clearly we're all too painfully aware that this is not only a health crisis, but fundamentally a complete collapse of the floor, of the social floor underneath us, especially for the world's poor. Extreme poverty is on the rise for the first time in a quarter century. You've seen many of these very desperate situations through your political career, and also in your role as a special envoy at the United Nations. That got me thinking about the role of mediator, because you wrote a book many years ago called Towards a Peaceful Solution. And while that was in reference to your political life, it also references your role in bringing people together. With all that set of experiences in your mind and heart, how can you mediate, in inverted commas, this pandemic? How do you gather people around the biggest crisis in modern peacetime history, but quite frankly, an issue that's become so hugely divisive, not only in our populations, but sometimes even within our own homes?
Well, I go back to my remarks yesterday. yesterday or a couple of days ago at the opening of the social summit, where I began my keynote address by quoting Muhammad Yunus in the very beginning. In the sense I summarize, I don't have the speech now here, whereby until we resolve, we vaccinate everybody, until we reach out to everybody and resolve this pandemic, well, no one will be safe. And this is an, an extraordinary pandemic. I think the first one in our humanity history that the pandemic, the virus reached the White House. And then it went to 10 Downing Street, and then to Champs-Élysées, the presidential palace in France. And we just don't know whether Putin got it or not, but few other head of states around the world got it. And so totally non-discriminatory. And then a vaccine has been found in the most record time, unbelievable, This has not been the case with malaria, for instance. Malaria has been around for hundreds of years, dengue, but this has been mostly a tropical disease, and tropical means in poorer countries. So there has not been much huge investment over generations on this. But in cynic, but I have to say, as again I said in my remarks, opening remarks, in that besides the death toll medically caused by COVID, there is this extraordinary impact on the social and economic conditions in developing countries across the world. Look at India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, in South Asia, across the African continent and elsewhere in Asia, in ASEAN countries, for Indonesia, 270 million people. Throughout Latin America, hundreds of millions of people thrown back into poverty and extreme poverty. What does that imply? As Yunus said in his remarks, and I literally transport this to what is the situation, is that, well, there will be millions more flocking to Europe, and no matter how high, how thick the walls you build around Europe or North America, well, you will have millions and millions of people flocking to Europe, and that very destabilizing for everybody, destabilizing for our own countries from where people flee, destabilizing for the first recipient countries like the Southern Europe, Greece, Turkey, Malta, and all the others in the Mediterranean area. So, and then it generate, is exploited by extreme elements of the right, to further destabilize Europe, and so it is in our common interest to mobilize the scientific community, the pharmaceutical community, the private sector. You mentioned about the private sector. I say yes, because private sector today has far more resources than 50 years ago. 60 years ago at the Marshall Plan, it was the United States with 15% of its GDP, and 50% of the US GDP at that time was only like $5 billion. Well, today, individuals, recently on July 18, I was the guest speaker with the Young Presidents Organization based in Chicago. They have more than 20,000 plus members around the world. They employ more than 20 million people. And this organization alone, they manage $9 trillion. So these are companies. And so I believe it is possible to mobilize 10,000 richest companies in the world, 10,000 richest foundations, 10,000 richest churches, led by, for instance, the Vatican, the Pope, 10,000 richest individuals, men and women around the world. So not only in the West, but in India, you know, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Japan, in South Korea, in Brazil, all of this. So I think, yes, time has come for the private sector that has incredible accumulated wealth, join with governments and multilateral institutions, not only to address the medical side, public health side of COVID, but the social and economic dimensions of this tragedy. And I believe it is possible.
Dr. Ramos-Horta and Professor Yunus, on the final word before I give it over to Cam Donaldson to wrap things up for us. We talked about private sector, we talked about the Vatican, we talked about getting people together. Is it time to respond? I'm not sure if it was a formal or informal offer from the Vatican to host a global gathering of figures to address this vaccine issue once and for all. We know that such is the impact of Vatican City and of the Pope at the center of that, that many people will have to respond and will want to respond to that level of invitation.
A consultation is always good. I mean, it's, if it is Pope convening it, is a tremendous amount of religious implications. That followers of the religion will follow that. If the right messaging is done, this will be a tremendous help. But Pope shouldn't be the only one convening. There are other religious leaders, other thought leaders, other moral leaders. They can do the same on moral ground. And it's always the power of the people, what they feel, what they want. And this is one issue. We're not involving this. We're saying that simply they cannot afford, sorry, we cannot give them the vaccine. Otherwise, we'll love to give it to them. Very simple kind of explanations that they cannot produce it because they don't have the capacity to do that. And it's dismissed at that point. It's nothing is being pushed beyond that, that the vaccines can be produced all over the world, given the withdrawal of the patent right. And you'll see new companies will come up with the new equipments and so on, because everybody sees the need for this, and the governments will come back with supporting them, the local production, because they're sick of waiting for others to give them the vaccines. Bangladesh cannot get the vaccines from India, although they signed the agreement with the Serum Institute, and they failed because India stopped their export for any country. So our supply is done. So we are running around to find the supply from China, from Russia, and very small quantity, not enough for our need. So everybody will love to have their possibility of controlling or influencing the production in their own country, supporting the production capacity to improve and so on and so forth.
Dr. Ramos-Horta and Professor Yunus, thank you very much for being with us. I think we have a lot there to work on already, that this is not the end. These social business days, I mean, this is the way Professor Yunus does it. He reels you in and then you can never find a way out again. You feel captivated and you feel part of a family. So we thank you both so much for lending and gifting us your moral stewardship at a really, really important time for all of us on the planet, and really encouraging us to go forward, to really push and to understand that whether it be in an individual capacity or even deeper, there is a role and opportunity for each one of us to play right now, not in the future, right now. And Enzo, I think what we're going to do is get back and work with you and to follow up on the proposal that you very kindly conveyed today. And there seems to be some encouraging signs towards that. Thank you very much to Enzo Curcio for that. I know, Cam Donaldson, I haven't given you as much time as we were hoping to, but we're very touched that you can be with us. Many of us in the social business family know him, and in the Yunus family. Dr. Cam Donaldson is the Yunus Chair and Distinguished Professor for Health Economics. Professor, could you just wind up and link the thoughts for us so that we walk away with some sense of the content that we've been getting today?
Yeah, I can certainly try, and it's such a privilege to be part of such an amazing panel. The contributions have been superb. I mean, I'm just going to offer an economics perspective on this, because every now and then Professor Yunus pops into our academic meetings, which take place in parallel to things like Social Business Day, and he sets us a challenge. And a challenge he set during the Summer of Purpose last year was about the vaccine. And he said, you know, economics seems to be getting in the way here, but is there an economic solution to this? And to me, I think that's very much what's been articulated here today, which is that part of the problem is I think we're stuck in a world where we're focused on, if we look at the economic world in very simplistic terms, we're focused on demand side solutions. So even the World Health Organization is saying that we should allocate vaccines on some proportional model, in the sense of the number of cases that exist at any particular time in particular countries. But as with that and other academic models that have been proposed, all that is going to do is just try and shift resources or shift vaccines around the world, which will still mean sacrifice and delay. And it's something that it seems the global north is not willing to buy into. And indeed, it adds the global north to these demand side problems by vaccine nationalism and the hoarding of vaccines with respect to, you know, today the UK, for example, having vaccines contracted for that are way more than our population would ever require. So what Yunus's challenge led us to come up with was to say we need to switch to the other side of the market here and think about supply side solutions. And that's what I think Yunus and signatories of the vaccines as a global common good and the People's Vaccine Alliance led by people like Nabil and his colleagues are actually articulating, that if we switch to the supply side, there are challenges. The main thing that would be required would be to surrender patents, place them in the public domain. Any reasonable research and development costs could be met, and indeed have already been subsidized by public funding and governments already. But the key thing is that would do is to unleash the capacity for generic production in those parts of the world where the vaccine is most needed. So that supply side solution, I think, is the key here. We have the administrative structures, we have Gavi, we have COVAX, etc. And I think even the pharmaceutical industry would benefit from this as we get back to operating in a post-COVID world. And any back of the envelope cost benefit analysis has shown that the social benefits of this vastly outweigh any costs that would be involved in transitioning to that supply side focus. I think Marina summed it up going back to her initial presentation, where she showed that for other diseases, we have demonstrated we can do this. We come up with global solutions to these issues all the time. It just seems very strange that we've not managed to do it in this respect. But I think a lot of it is about surrendering property rights on the supply side, and we can then move on to solving this problem.
Thank you so much, Professor Donaldson. I think that last word you use there, surrendering, is very keen to the spirit of this conversation. And thank you very much for summing up some of those ideas so brilliantly as we walk away from this. Cam McDonaldson, the Yunus Chair and Distinguished Professor for Health Economics, thank you very much. And to all of our friends, to Lamia Morshed, who has been rallying all of us for well over a year, and for years as well in different areas of work, through all the exceptional circumstances that you've had to navigate this year. Thank you for that. Also, in particular, to Marina Mahathir for joining us during the midst of a lockdown in Kuala Lumpur. We send all of our best wishes to people in Kuala Lumpur and also to people across Malaysia at this time. To Nabil Ahmed for being so brilliant in your work at the People's Vaccine Alliance and more broadly at Oxfam and with UNAIDS and with so many other partners and individuals that we couldn't possibly even recall them at this very moment. and to Enzo Curcio for always coming up with the innovative ideas that help propel us forward, including, as you mentioned, their suggestion from the Vatican to convene a global conference of people to make COVID-19 vaccines truly a common good. And thank you also to Sharon Stone for pulling together the different crises of this modern era and showing how each of them link into the other, so that we don't walk away thinking that we can just learn to live with COVID, but we learn to push it out of the door and not make it welcome in our own homes. On that thought, AIDS has been a game changer for us. It's contributed so much to the science and understanding and how we work with community in this crisis. This crisis lent so much on the work of the people who have died, the more than 30 million people who've given their lives in the struggle against HIV and AIDS. And I think the best way to honor them and the people living positively today is to make every single life count. Those mRNA vaccines did not come up in the last year alone. They lean on the back of millions of people who could not live today, and they lean on the work of decades of work in science and public health research. And we thank you very much to Dr. Jose Ramasota and to Professor Mohammed Yunus for jointly leading us today and for giving us new understanding as we try and find a good way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. That was quite an insightful session and arguably one of the best ones we had in this entire Social Business Day conference. With that vote of thanks and another heartfelt thanks from the Yunus Center to all our participants and speakers, we would like to move on to our next plenary session. In fact, it's a keynote session. And for that, I would request Mr. Shazib to come and join us and take us through. Shazib, are you there?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you so much, Shihab. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Shazib Muhammad Khairul Islam, and I work as the Managing Director at YY Ventures and Impact Hub Dhaka, and I'll be your MC for the next few hours. Let us start this part of Social Business Day 2021 with a particular focus on co-working and community spaces. To begin with, we will have a friend joining us from the ground to give us an idea of Impact Hub in Dhaka, a social business offering community space, programs, and a range of networking opportunities to social entrepreneurs here. May I welcome Lamia Hafiz, Community Lead at Impact Hub Dhaka. Lamia is a former Bangladesh women's national basketball team player and the go-to person at Impact Hub Dhaka. Over to you, Lamia.
Thank you so much, Shajib. Hi, my name is Lamia Hafiz, and I'm very happy to be here. Impact Hub Dhaka is a wholly owned subsidiary of YY Ventures, a social business company that finds, incubates, and invests in early stage social businesses. We launched this space that you can see behind me as a community space in March 2020. And guess what? In 8 days, our country went into a lockdown. For the next 6 months, we could not come back to offices and we could not host our community of entrepreneurs and makers. But we tried to utilize the space by setting up a maker lab, producing face masks, face shields, and other things, amongst other things. Our space is currently offering 7 private offices where 7 social businesses and impact enterprises are working, and we host about 20 members. We've designed ourselves as a non-profit, non-dividend company, and we're a social business, and I'm very happy to report to you from Impact Hub Dhaka space today. Let us have a look at a video through which you can see how we're building our social business. Whenever possible, I invite you all to drop in and check out our space. And if you're a foreigner traveling in Bangladesh, when possible, Impact Hub Dhaka is your office. Come join us as we envision to create a Bangladesh where everyone thrives. Thank you so much, Shajib.
Thank you so much, Lamia, for joining us from Impact Hub Dhaka. Guests and friends, Impact Hub Dhaka is part of the Global Impact Hub Network, and we are designed as a social business. And as Lamia said, I would echo with her, it's your space. Whenever you are willing to work, you need a space, drop in, drop by, we are happy to help. Now let's move on to the next segment, which is our keynote speech for the day. I'm super happy to welcome Gabriela Gendel, Executive Director at Impact Hub Network, as our keynote speaker to speak on the topic, No Going Back, what do the future of our community and co-working spaces look like? Gabriela is an experienced leader of innovative global organizations, organizational and personal development consultant, and experiential learning designer. And I'm so happy to call Gabriela and the whole Impact Hub Network a friend of the social business movement. Welcome, Gabriela. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. We definitely feel we are ourselves a part of the Yunus family. So also happy to be here and share these insights. And also, hello, Professor Yunus. I see you here. Nice to meet you again in the next week. It seems we're keeping connected over the weeks. And also belated happy birthday. I know that we have said happy birthday on the social media channels, but let me also take this moment to say it one more time. In my culture, happy birthday is well received at any time throughout the year. So here it is. The way you've heard from Lamia about Impact Hub Dhaka, and we're really proud to have Impact Hub Dhaka as part of our network, there are similar spaces and communities that we have around the world in over 100 locations and now over 60 countries, including in developed economies, in emerging economies, and in fragile economies, with that basically being one of the most replicated social businesses ourselves around the world. And proudly being so as part of the Yunus family and as part of the ideology of social business as a force for the transformation in our societies that we hope to see and we must see in this decade of action. As the title of the session says, there's no going back. More of us are needed that are looking at things differently, that are taking an innovative approach and that are putting ourselves in the game for enterprising and for changing things to be more inclusive and more sustainable than what they are today. As you guys asked on what we learned from around the world on what the future of community and co-working spaces is about, I'd say there are 4 questions that first need to be asked before we answer that question. And the first 4 questions are questions of mindset, basically, to understand where the future will go, right? So one first question would be, do you believe we are in a post-pandemic world or going there, or actually in a pre-pandemic world, right? And that is a significant mindset shift depending on what you choose between the two of them. And as you heard on the panel before, we are not above this pandemic. On the contrary, we are still dealing with it. Many of us are still deeply suffering. And whilst in some parts of the world we might be post-pandemic, until we resolve it everywhere, we will not be safe anywhere in the world. Even with this pandemic being addressed, there will be other pandemics. And I think what this pandemic has showed is that our priority for health and emergency services and the ability to react fast and together can deeply be improved than what we see in the world scene right now. So the power of community is pretty essential to get us to respond very differently, both to this pandemic and hopefully to future similar situations. The second question is, with this pandemic maybe getting under control, do we focus on reconnection to economic growth into the old ways, or do we choose something different? And we choose to define ourselves in a different economic paradigm. That obviously has an entrepreneurship and innovation component at the heart of it as a question. And of course, communities and co-working spaces are a nest for that entrepreneurship and innovation potential that has an economic positive impact, but maybe with a more sustainable and more inclusive angle than what we've seen before. And the third question is, what do we choose now? Do we fight for social inclusion? Do we fight for climate change? Oftentimes these questions come with an opposition to each other, but in reality, we can't choose between anymore. We need to fight for both. And we need to fight for both together with a more sustainable economic paradigm. So there's also a big trend around new governance structures, prioritizing new outcomes and measuring different outcomes, and basically showing that at the intersection of social inclusion, climate change, and entrepreneurial development, there are solutions that are the better solutions for the future we want to see. So with these big questions in mind, that's how I would frame the future of community and the future of co-working spaces, because the way we see community in answering these questions is it will become the unit of change. The level of change we need now is not individuals anymore. We need communities to stand together, and with all the individuals in them, take a different route, take a different paradigm, become entrepreneurial, drive innovation, and drive collective innovation for significant impact at scale. So in a way, community becomes more important now as the unit of change, way beyond the individual alone. We know that individuals can make a difference, and they actually have a massive impact on the world. But oftentimes, sometimes this is too much of an individualistic agenda rather than a collective benefit, right? So we need to learn how to enterprise in communities and have that collective at the heart of our work. And the co-working spaces, the way we see them together with these big questions about the future of the world, these are, let's imagine, the town halls for that change to happen, right? So the place where innovators and change makers can meet, can learn, can connect, can thrive in creating solutions and support each other in improving these solutions, and very importantly, connect to scale these solutions beyond just one local community to many other communities out there in the world. So the power of community and the power of co-working spaces, when held in that mindset of transformation, is pretty essential. In terms of trends that will define the future of community and the future of co-working, if I may start with community, what we see is actually an even stronger focus on deeper belonging and shared values in these communities, right? We all know that together with the health epidemic that's at the forefront, there is an epidemic of depression, of loneliness, of actual feeling disempowered in the face of all the issues that are happening in the world. And we all need belonging to thrive. So communities are the answer, and that's one important element of shared values and shared action that will be much more important to thriving communities. That means more curated communities, more intentional communities, more aligned communities, and more deep collaborations in communities rather than just at action level, at values level. Shifting the paradigm together to a more inclusive and sustainable world. We also see a trend in more thematic communities, so big communities that come to focus on common issues, let's say the health community, the circularity community, and so on and so forth. We see a big connection that's happening on these thematic areas, and some thematics, particularly health, education, and circular development being quite strong, and starting to connect not only locally as communities, but also globally as trends. And that's a hopeful dimension. And the third trend that we see in communities is the need to be more intentional around inclusion. So how do we bridge, for example, the rural and city divide? Oftentimes communities don't necessarily do this bridging, they rather close within geographic city or rural dynamics, but we can't afford that. We need to build the bridges. We need to connect these communities, and we all have a responsibility to use maybe different models of community that bridges between them, or generational divides. How do we ensure our communities are diverse from a generational point of view, from a socioeconomic point of view, from a racial point of view, and how do we intentionally curate communities to look more like the societies we want to see in the future and much more inclusive than they are today. And last but not least, more from a business point of view, the community component is actually a powerful unit of change economically too. Maybe moving away from the ownership model, which is anyway unsustainable. Not all of us can own everything equally, particularly knowing that with some of the latest research, 90% of what we own at every second of the day is actually not used. It's not in use, it's not a common good. With a lot of the business models out there, particularly the highly capitalistic business models, right? So how about we look more at user models, and communities are increasingly important in these user models where we create an asset in the community, a commons, and that is being used by the members of the community rather than everybody owning it. That will lead to more sustainable patterns and also to more access for more people. And also to economic opportunity for those of us who can create business models that think in that direction. I think many social businesses are already thinking in that direction globally. So those would be some trends around community. In terms of trends around the co-working spaces in which these communities can meet and be supported. As I said, we look at co-working spaces with a symbolic role to play in this change, and that is as a town hall for the social transformation through this democratic design, to this democratic participation, and through putting entrepreneurship and innovation at the intersection of inclusion, green transition, and economic development at the center of our business startups. And the trends that we see there are obviously with COVID-19, actually, a lot of us are thinking around flexible working setups. So co-working spaces are posed to increase and to have more participants around the world, particularly with an affluence of employees from public and private sector that are starting to change their behavior to use these more flexible communities. This is a big opportunity for many of us to engage these people into the bigger movement of change and transformation. They bring a lot of skills, they bring a lot of expertise, and they are oftentimes not aware of the bigger transformation that we could be doing and the alternative social business models that are there to the current business or public approaches. So it's a big opportunity, it's a trend, we need to open up to them, but obviously we also need to translate and to be able to build the bridges with this new target group. A second big trend in co-working spaces is the focus on health and well-being. As I said earlier, health is anyway a major trend, both in terms of the need out there in the world right now, and also in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation. But we need to create spaces where health becomes a concern at the center of everything. The health of individuals, the health of communities, the health of the way that we operate within our spaces and beyond our spaces. So we see big trends on how spaces will shift to create much more well-being and health patterns for all of us. We also see a trend of digitalization. And I know that I think by now we are all zoomed up in our various engagements online, but this is here to stay to some extent, maybe not so much as right now when we are in lockdown in many parts of the world, but a blended hybrid offering is very likely to stay. And there is a benefit in that because we have a bigger connection with other international communities and may hear about new ideas, can connect better, and can also go beyond those who can access the physical space to those who can access the virtual space in a co-working type of logic. So we're also developing a lot of technology around that. And last but not least, I'd say there is a trend related to the green transformation. How do we ensure that the spaces we use and the way we use the spaces truly inspire our communities about living a more sustainable life, right? So there are many solutions, some of them highly sophisticated technology, but many of them very accessible technologies that we can all actually use in our lives and in our households if we only saw the solutions in practice. And that's where co-working spaces can truly make a difference by showcasing the solutions, by using the solutions, by creating a standard and obviously access to affordable, good solutions for a more green living and green work. So that's a lot on our radar as well. And last but not least, as I will say, for co-working spaces of the future to be a true town hall for change, we also need to look at our governance. Who is actually owning these spaces, contributing to these spaces, and participating in the future of these spaces? So can we see our communities not just as consumers and as users of the spaces, but actually as co-creators of the spaces? This is important because we would be setting a different standard and different understanding around how business should engage stakeholders in their governance and not just in their products and their services. So that's somewhere else where we can make a difference in the co-working movement. And yeah, very much I invite you to join that. So with that, I would wrap it up and say this is what we see from the Impact Hub side. And of course, it is always with an angle of impact-driven communities and co-working spaces. I'm sure that others may focus on other directions, but for us, we look at community as the agent of change and at co-working spaces at the town hall for these change makers and innovators. And that remains to stay and is more relevant than ever because we need much bigger community and much stronger efforts to see the change happening in the next years. There's no going back, as Professor Yunus has said many times. And that no going back starts with us making a different choice around the communities we're part of, around the businesses we develop and we create, and around the way we live together in the spaces and in the communities that we are part of. So thank you for having me here today, and that will be my contribution.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. Thanks so much for the entire community of Impact Hub and social business. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a 1-minute break for a small